So I grew up in a small town, and there were always people talking and gossiping and talking politics, but also talking. You'd walk in and sometimes they'd go quiet. You could sort of go down the wrong dirt road in the way that you can go down the wrong alley and end up in trouble.
That's where the bad stuff happens. That's where the body ends up.
And I had a friend that ended up kidnapping someone and being the first person to be pursued on a live CNN fugitive chase.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to Sinister. Today's guest is someone who, like me, has spent a lot of time questioning the stories we tell ourselves. Stories about crime, about good versus evil, and the shades of gray in between. But most importantly, all those brilliant minds who stare into the abyss in hopes of bringing such evil to justice. And with us on our dark journey today is Eric Rickstad, a New York Times bestselling author who has written countless thrillers that explore the darkest corners of human behavior. Among them, I Am Not Who You Think I Am, great title, which was a New York Times Thriller of the Year, Lilith, also Reap, and the Canaan Crime series. He's just come out with his latest book, Remote the Five, which is part of the new Remote series. You can also read Remote the Six. But today, we're not here to just talk fiction. Eric recently wrote an article on why criminal profiling is a pop culture myth. And because I'm currently deep into a podcast about my experiences with the Long Island serial killer case, he reminded me about why this is such an important topic and why this myth is so pervasive. So, Eric, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Josh. I'm a big fan of your work.
Thank you. Flattery will get you everywhere. Before we jump into criminal profiling, I just want to go back for a couple seconds. Number one, Reap, about weed farmers in northern Vermont. And I love weed crime stories, so I cannot wait to dig into that one.
Right. Yeah, that was my debut. So that's always got a fond spot. And it's a lot of it's based on, some things that transpired with friends.
A lot of weed, like small grows, I guess, in Vermont and things like that.
Yeah, Reap takes place in the 80s. I thought recently, is Reap still relevant? Because, everything's so legalized now. But to me, actually, I thought about it and it's more relevant than ever to reflect on a time that, forget the 80s, up until 15 years ago, people were imprisoned for, and for not growing very much, which my friend was. But he ended up doing about 50 months of his 60-month federal, in his mid-20s, 22 to 27 years old.
Now, speaking of small town writers, I saw this year that you read Thomas Tryon's The Other. Tryon happens to be the most famous author from my hometown in Cornwall, Connecticut. Another writer who leans into that small town vibe. So, you're very much into small town kind of secrets. And I was thinking about it, looking at some of your work, like what a great prompt that is for a writer.
It is.
Small town secrets. Go.
Yeah. So I grew up in a small town in Vermont, and my mom, I was raised by a single mom after the age of like 8, me and my 3 sisters. And she was a hardware store clerk for 25 years. So when I was a kid, I would, we go to school and then we stop by, I got to see, mom on the way home, make sure we're alive. So, and there were always people talking and adults talking and gossiping and talking politics, but also talking. You'd walk in and sometimes they'd go quiet, and you got this sense and this vibe that they were talking about things that obviously weren't like a kid shouldn't be privy to. But I was always, even then, very perceptive. And before that, when my father was around, he was a barber. So that's even more of that.
Totally. The barber, right? He'd get all the info.
I'd read my horror comics, but I'd be listening to them and pick up on things in a certain vibe. And I am not who you think I am as a father who's a barber. And it leads to everything.
I read your interview with Don Winslow.
Yes.
It was great.
Thanks.
There's a story in there about your friend on CNN. Can you tell me that story?
Yeah, sure. So when I was about probably in 7th grade, This family moved 3 houses up from us on our little street, and they had moved up from Washington, D.C., and it was someone who had 2 sisters. And my friend, Phil, who I became friends with, was about 3, 4 years older than me, but he was a great guy. Everybody really liked him. He was athletic. He was charming. He was a handsome kid. About 4 years later, when he was a senior or so, or a little after, he graduated and moved to Texas. And I only saw him once, like a couple years later, when he stopped by. And we saw him at a gas station, my mother and I, and one of my sisters, and he had a convertible green Corvette. And about 2 years after that, I'm watching CNN, and on comes this fugitive chase. They just cut to it, and they said this guy has just robbed a bank in Denver at gunpoint. He ends up hitting and killing a state trooper at about 80 miles an hour who got out on the road and pulled over. And this is this is 10 years before OJ. This has never been done before. And I'm just in shock because of all of it, and he crashes the Bronco actually that he had, tries to kidnap a woman with a baby. She flees. He shoots at her car. She flees. He starts shooting at the helicopter. He kidnaps an old man and makes the old man drive while he's on the passenger's floor of this truck, and going by cops who don't even have any clue he's in there, except the helicopter says, "That's him. Get after him." And they turn around, And so finally the helicopter pilot had enough, and he sets down in front of him in like a plaza, like hovers just low enough so that the truck can't get under him, but then it can't back up because literally like 17 or at least a dozen state troopers and local sheriffs and stuff have now converged on him behind him. The old man tumbles out and escapes, and the cops open up the truck doors and shoot this guy 17 times at like 3 feet away. No one knew who it was until the end. And they show this guy's mugshot and say his name. And I was like, "That's Phil. What happened? What happened?" And it turns out the reason they moved to DC was because of a very traumatic incident that happened with his father, who had committed suicide.
Mhm.
And that sort of spurred the whole thing. And it's not to excuse it away or explain it away, but without that incident, that doesn't happen. There's just no way,
Absolutely.
it happens. There's just no way.
But let's go back now and talk a little bit about why we're here, which is this. You wrote this article, why serial killers or profilers are a pop cultural myth. And as I said, that really spoke to me because of what I'm doing in the Long Island serial killer case. So, we like to pull back the layers of media and crime and really to get down to the mythology. So when did you realize that this was a myth?
Well, it's a myth in that most people in the general public think that somehow there is a direct correlation. Someone can profile someone and they find that person in the basement because they've narrowed it down so much. And really, from everything I've understood and read and researched, it's really so much less than that. Even though there's a whole behavioral science department at the FBI, um, when you step back and look at it, a lot of what we know and understand is from like the Silence of the Lambs or Red Dragon, and that sort of spawned the public pop image of what profilers really, and then everything since, profiler and series about them. And I loved Mindhunter. I thought it was a great series. It was mad when it was only 2 seasons, but there is a real disconnect between what they can do and what that results in as far as criminal prosecution or even arrest or anything like that. You think about Hannibal Lecter, even he was the guy's psychiatrist, so he's not even really profiling. He just knows what he's like. He's feeding Starling information, but he's not, you know, sort of guessing what he's doing or educated guess on because of how he's behaving and what his victims. He's already studied the guy as a psychiatrist. So it's fact, all the big serial killers, as we know him, the Golden State Killer being most recent, he's caught through DNA.
It's very much like a crime urban legend,
Right.
and I'm into urban legends. So it's like this kind of crime urban legend. You create a comforting narrative
Right.
because the other idea that these guys are just out there, and you're only going to stop them later It's too terrifying. It's too inexplicable. So you need to create this way of doing it.
Right. Right. And the Long Island Killer, he's just, he doesn't look the part. He doesn't play the part, and that's over and over and over again, we're learning.
You're not just a thriller. You're not a beach thriller. You're a real wordsmith. You are a real writer who happens to do thrillers. Quite good one. Why serial killers? The remote series is kind of going away from that small town.
Right. Right. Well, I have a fascination with them in the way that a lot of people do. And, the Ted Bundy thing always stuck with me. One, he was born in the same town that my mom was born in Burlington, Vermont. And the
Really?
place where his mother had him and was with him for a little while is still there, the Elizabeth Lund home for teenage moms that, gives them support. But also when I was in like fifth grade, I've always been a huge reader, and we had sustained silent reading at the last 20 minutes of every day. And I was probably the only one that was actually reading. But I picked out, this was like, it must have been like 79 or something. But Ted Bundy had been caught, but he wasn't a household name. He wasn't anybody. He was just, someone who had been captured. I was reading this Reader's Digest, and there was this piece in there that was preceded by like photos of what I thought were photos of different men. I had that one where he's totally enraged in court.
Yeah, he's like, all right.
Yeah. And his mouth is wet. And then like a bearded guy who's like 30 pounds lighter and disheveled. One where there's this guy really smartly dressed and smiling with other people. And probably, 5 or 6, 7 of these photos that on glance, especially being a younger kid, all look like middle-aged men to me. And then I started reading this piece, the story about him, and then learned, oh, he was born in like 5 minutes down the road where I was born. And, you know, and so that always stuck with me. And then I always wanted to do something that was wider. And, I am a big fan of, Silence of the Lambs and stories that are more involved and maybe involve the FBI and are, national manhunts. And there's that fear and exploring why this person might be doing it and how to prevent him from doing it again. And that's sort of cat and mouse, it can make for a really exciting read and bring my own stamp to it and have, the FBI agent be sort of a real person that's got a damaged past, a traumatic past.
Sure.
In those types of things.
I read this quote of yours that I think just gets to the heart of the matter so clearly. I couldn't fathom how a person could commit such atrocities. This is where I believe our fascinations, for better or worse, lie. We can never understand it. There is no rational explanation for killing and torturing other people. It's like that's just what it is. I mean, that's our fascination. We don't understand it. And so we need to understand it. We need to explore why, right?
Right. And I don't think that there is ever any understanding it, which is why we remain fascinated by it, because most of us, whatever the huge percentages, just can't even think about doing those things, let alone carrying them out, let alone carrying them out again and again and again. And that's where this Lucas Stark and the agent begins to see, like, well, it's not even an obsession, it's like an addiction.
Yeah.
And there's something, even if it was, you'd think that you'd be able to stop yourself, but there's a thrill to it. There's a joy that they get out of tormenting other human beings that we can never contemplate.
That was one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, because you seem to have, I assume we're from the same age, maybe a little bit of the same socioeconomic or what have you. But, why is it that a certain, group of the world is fascinated with this stuff? And it's not just, us, but, why? Because I'm sitting here going down the road of this Long Island serial killer case, and I'm like, this is a case which I've been on for 10 years, and now I'm revisiting again, and I'm like in month 4, and I'm like, well, is it worth it to talk about the profiling of this guy? But actually it is, and are we just doing it to kind of enjoy the creepiness of it, or is there a more important reason? And I realized I was looking at some of your stuff, and I'm like, okay, we need to understand why. But what I loved about it is you and I are both kind of well versed, I guess, when it comes to the media and the lore of serial profiling. I mean, we know that it's fiction, but yet I'm sitting there on the couch yelling at Mindhunter. I'm like, oh, come on. But yet the minute he starts profiling and the music comes on, like, I'm totally in. It's seductive. Like, what is it? We both know it's bullshit.
Yeah.
Yet we love it.
Yeah. And you can, it's sort of like that medium trick or the trick, on stage with the audience. And I'm going to tell you, pick anyone from the audience. And it's not a parlor trick by any means. There's very serious professionals that helps, with cases, but there's, like Lucas starts to call it a science, behavioral science. Well, it's not. You're looking at what someone did, and from that, sort of trying to make sense of it and give insight into that person. And like with the parlor trick, you might have 98% of it wrong, but when the 2% of it is right, it's like a miracle. Oh, you got that right. White male. Yeah. Yeah, it was.
In reality, you really need to kind of get everything right to be right, right? You can't just get one thing right.
Right. You can't just, give a few things that pretty much is already known anyway, regardless of the case.
So, but but then again, right? I mean, if we go back in history, detective fiction, right?
Yep.
Poe, Rue Morgue, it wasn't cops and robbers. Really, it was profiling almost way back. So
Yeah.
we've been on this track
Yeah.
100+ years.
Right. Right. And I think it's just I think profiling is an extension of that need to understand. When
Right.
you hear about something, you immediately think who, in the right mind would do this. And if it's obviously even back then, but a small town, then you think, well, maybe it's one of us.
That's right, because that's the word, right? Yeah.
Tried to figure out who this person could possibly be seems like a natural, instinctual thing to do. Human beings, like at a primal level, we need to find out who's doing this.
That's very interesting. A bunch of folklorists once told me that part of the reason why is that you want to make sure that you couldn't do it. That's like we're into some of these urban legends. It's really the most basic fear is that one day you may wake up and either be crazy or be capable of murder or something. So your need to know why
Right.
is to reassure yourself that you won't do it.
Right. Right. And then it's the
Other, right? That because if you won't do it, then it could be the other. But yeah, so I always found that interesting. It's like, why do we have this? Puzzles, mysteries, yes, 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 but
yeah.
why? Now you spend a lot of time with remote, like debunking the myth,
Yep.
and you said it's fun to debunk the myth, right?
Yeah.
Why? I do. I feel the same way. But why do you think it's fun to debunk the myth?
Because I think, as you as a filmmaker and me as a writer, we get to indulge in these topics, whatever topic we're on at the time, in a way that most people don't. We sit with it day after day after day and mull it over, and almost everybody else is, working, even though what we do is work. It definitely is, especially filmmaking. But
And writing.
the idea of being able to sit with it and think about it and turn it and look at it and then realize this is mostly like a myth that started back then, leads up to these movies, and now it's just sort of accepted. And so it's fun for those who aren't paying attention if you know, get them in front of an interview like this or a piece that I wrote or the book itself, uh, pop that bubble so that they see it now and think about it a little bit.
Right.
Wait, because they never did. Why would they?
Sure, because that's what you're being told by the media.
Right? Like
Yeah.
people, it's just out there in the ether. And so you think it's true. And, who gives much thought to whether it is and has substance or not. And so it's fun to stop them, in
Yeah.
their tracks and be like, wait, what do you mean? Well, name a crime, name a killer that's actually been caught
Yeah.
in the way that you see every week on, CSI or whatever. Well, he's, he's in the RV by the by the beach
Yeah.
or whatever.
Uh,
And
You know,
entertainment for sure.
sure, sure, sure.
But you can also want to be like, are you kidding me? Come on.
That's what I'm like, come on. But I can't. But Mindhunter was so like, I wanted to hate Mindhunter like nobody's business. I was like, this is gonna be bullshit. This is gonna suck. And in 2 seconds, I'm like, oh, this is really good.
Yeah. It was done really well, I thought, you know.
Yeah, Fincher's.
And I like how they teased, I can't remember, was it the BTK?
Yeah, it was BTK. Yeah.
And so that was the thread I really wanted to see explored.
Played out.
So many cases that just, they just don't get solved. They're so, if you think about the missing young women and girls
Yeah,
that go missing every year and are known to be murdered
yeah.
and no one's arrested, then that person that did that is still out there, whether they intend to do it again or not. And it's by the thousands.
I mean, our solve rate is horrible. What was so interesting too is when you were like, the minute you were talking about debunking the pop culture myth and the whole fact that, come on, Silence of the Lambs, he's not really doing that. Like, he's got information, but, you know, so what was so interesting to me is the Long Island serial killer case, right? This guy is 60. So he grew up in the golden age of serial murder, right? He grew up when he was like 23.
Right.
Bundy is coming out, all these guys. And in a lot of ways, this guy is a product of that pop culture. I think he just, instead of wanting to become a cop or a profiler, he wanted to become a serial killer. And John Douglas, grew up in Long Island in Hicksville. And so what we find in this case, and we'll get into it in the podcast when we do this podcast, is that he was reading Mindhunter, trying to basically throw the police off by
Right.
what he was reading.
Right.
Almost in a way, he's reading the mythology,
Right.
and then trying to use that against the police so that they wouldn't be on his tail. So here's a serial killer who believed the mythology that we're all talking about and then tried to enact it himself.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And, even the I can't remember his name. I should, the guy who just pleaded guilty to the Idaho murder.
Yeah. Richard
Criminal who was studying criminology and
with Catherine Ramsland,
yeah.
a
So
pretty,
trying to think, what are the loopholes? What do I need to do to get away with it? What are they going to look for? That whole thing, which is a whole other level.
well, yeah, totally.
Living in a bubble, even if it's just psychologically, mentally living in a bubble, like Ted Bundy was very social and blah, 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 but you're in your head doing these things and plotting these things. But then now I've got literature and shows to sort of try to figure out.
Totally.
I'm just one of them. I'm part of that group.
Yeah.
And I want to be known for that, and there's a lot that feeds into all of it,
It's so nuts. I think when you spoke to a number of profilers with which to do your research, they don't buy the media version. They understand.
Right. Yeah, all the professionals understand their peripheral, they might be of some assistance to help get a fuller picture of this person, but they don't expect, their profile to, it lead to them knocking on a door.
Yeah.
But they understand it.
Well, I also think when I talk to them now, they're like, look, Mindhunter, like we've evolved.
Right.
We no longer classify organized, disorganized. We've changed that modeling. We've changed the terms. I went back because I saw your article and I was like, oh shit, that Malcolm Gladwell article from 2007. You ever read that article? It's so good.
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's I forget what it's called, but I looked at it and he goes back to one of those first profiling cases, the Mad Bomber of New York City
Right.
in the 1950s. And this guy, Brissell,
Yeah.
who was the first guy to be like, oh, you're looking for a Slavic guy, and he's going to be wearing a 3-piece suit, a double-breasted suit, and the suit will be buttoned. Now, that was the whole thing. When they caught the guy, he was wearing a button suit, and that was the birth of profiling, theoretically.
Right.
Now, we also know that, probably like Douglas, his memoir had been changed to nail it a little bit harder, and they got the one thing that he got right, but they didn't get the 9 other things that he got wrong.
Exactly.
Let's face it, we have Silence of the Lambs and Mindhunter. There was before Silence of the Lambs, and then there was before Mindhunter. Now we're in a post Mindhunter world,
Right.
in terms of serial murder. Did you like go down the road of looking at all those tricks? He gets into the real, like, as you do a little bit, the astrological psychics, all the things that they use. I forget what they're called, like the double blind or the
Right, right.
Russian doll.
Yeah. And I did read it, and I've read that stuff for quite a while, all of that. So, remained interested in, was interested in it long before I wrote Remote. And then there's others profilers who, sort of risen to celebrity that were debunked and found
Mhm.
to be frauds. But you think about like the Zodiac killer, and profiling really works. Like, well, how much more information could you have on a person?
Tell me about Richard Walters.
So yeah, well, he's the guy I was just speaking of. Rose through the '80s and '90s on the coattails of the Red Dragon, the Silence of the Lambs, even before that, and the whole profiling um, industry, and would go to conferences and started lying about his resume, and he'd sort of fudge or lie about being more involved in an FBI case than he was. People never really checked it, and before you know it, after 15 years, he's on 2020 and 48 hours, and all these types of shows.
This guy was part of the Vioxx Society, right? I mean, we're not talking about a small group of individuals. What's ironic is listen, 48 hours. This is their bread and butter. You would think they would have
Right,
more
right.
fact checkers than they do, but he's there with like, the high end cop society. Like you would
Right.
think that the cops would be like, who's this guy?
Yeah. So he's sort of like almost parallels a serial killer who has, in the way that they create an illusion of who they are.
Totally.
It's the suburban guy, trying to make my way with my two kids and wife, but actually I've murdered all of these women and put them along the highway. And it's just this facade, and it's almost the same sort of, not to liken him to, but that thrill of
I don't know, of course.
presenting something that's totally fabricated. This is who I really am. I'm a fraud, or I'm a serial killer, or I'm this, or I'm that.
Right.
And they get away with it for
The
years.
thrill of the con.
For that, yeah, the thrill of the con.
Yeah, yeah. I'm interested because so many of your stories are about generational trauma. You look at it from your your main character's trauma and her, trauma, and how some people overcome that trauma to become heroes. Versus here's a situation where a guy doesn't overcome that trauma and, like Phil, becomes a criminal. What have you learned about trauma and where people take those paths? And
Well, one thing is that the trauma doesn't go away. It's always carried with you. And you think about the victims and the survivors of the victims and the families of the women that were killed by the Long Island Killer,
sure,
and I think part of the trauma too comes in, I mean, how long did it take to solve that? It's been decades. It's, like 20 something years. And for young women and the families of young women who maybe had a rough time, and so maybe they were involved, things that a lot of us wouldn't be involved in, and just, or maybe they are, but it's still like this dismissal by the law enforcement,
hmm
or a lot of law enforcement, or this, yeah, we'll get to it, kind of thing. That's a trauma.
re-traumatizing is what
Yeah,
it is.
re-traumatized, but it's just something that they can't. I think they keep within them. Like my friend moved up from DC, and that was it. We'll just move after this traumatic event. We won't
Mhm.
get any psychological help,
Right. Moving doesn't quite handle it, you know?
and we'll just change locations, and that doesn't work because it's within you. And so I think one of the themes I've seen over and over again is people who keep it secret,
Mhm.
don't share it, don't get either professional help, or don't have a family or friend core that can help at least sort of get it out of you to a degree that you can sort of climb your way out of it and become a young adult and into your 20s and 30s. And kind of, I think if you don't escape your mid 20s from it,
Mhm.
you're in trouble. Maybe it's just relationships, or maybe it's, you're not, but your life is a mess, maybe. And then, you can start to see people as, you know, needing to be punished, or screw them. I'll break into their house and steal their stuff. What do I care? What was,
Yeah.
I went through. Um,
Yeah.
so
I mean, look, going back to the victims in Long Island, this is a guy who obviously had some trauma, and what he does is he redistributes that trauma, not
right.
just on one person. He's destroyed all of those families, like
Yeah.
hundreds of people, right? Hundred, like that's the tragedy.
Hundreds of people.
That one part of their life becomes the story of their life.
Yeah. That's it. Like that's Phil's story,
Yeah.
it's how he ended up, but he has two sisters that I know very well. And, my sister was good friends with his younger sister as much as I was with him. And, they never escaped.
Well, I can't thank you enough. It's been great speaking to you. I can't wait to get into a couple of of course, the new one. I love that stuff. And then the remote series, and might just pick up Lilith too, because that one seems really ripe for what's going on.
That's my favorite, I think.
Is it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
That one took me, most books take me a year and a half, 2 years. That one took me 10 years.
It's your white whale.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Eric, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure's all mine. Look forward to your next work. Thank you.
Thanks.